Okay, well, it's a pleasure to have with us Dr. Don Matthews today to speak with us here at Peace in Kurdistan. Don has got a new book out, Blackcentricity. He's got a powerful story to tell, and so thank you for being with us today.
Sure, it's my pleasure to always engage with brothers and sisters in struggle. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, well, so I guess the way to begin is to ask you a little bit about your story, about how you first became concerned with matters of social justice.
Okay, well, I grew up on the south side of Chicago uh, with my own set of inner city blues. If you understand anything about the south side of Chicago in the 50s and the 60s, my parents had migrated from Mississippi, running from Jim Crow, only to meet Miss Jim Crow when they hit Chicago. And grew up in a tenement in the south side of Chicago. And I was came to age during the turbulent 60s. So I should tell you something,
Mm,
dealing with Malcolm and Martin and all that meant, the so-called riots, rebellions in the 60s, and being under siege, as you saw the National Guard rolling through your hood, and you just trying to make it home when the streets went up in fire. So I understand a little about domestic, well, warfare, if you understand what I'm saying. And
mm,
so it really politicized me. And so when I went to Northwestern University, as one of thousands of Black students who they need to get off the streets. They all gave us scholarships. We didn't have any scholarships until the 60s. Once the 60s hit, all of a sudden you could go to college. You
mm,
know, let's get you off the streets. So we could get acculturated. But I was always true to another calling. I always had a deep sense of the spirit moving in my heart. So even at Northwestern, when we went on strike to get a Black Studies department, when I had to challenge my professors about their explicit or implicit racism, was always a concern. So even though I was in speech and language pathology, I'm a certified speech and language therapist. I was always concerned with the poor and and racial and social injustice. So I went to seminary when I received the call to ministry, and from then I decided to do a PhD. Uh,
mm.
and Tell you a little funny story. I was camping with some of my ministry friends in seminary. We went to the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. Decided to go. We had decided to go do some camping up in Yosemite, and lo and behold, we met a bear. We inadvertently got between a bear and her cubs.
Oh, wow.
And so, interestingly enough, my companions were white, and one Filipino woman, and they all jumped behind me. I said, "Hey, that's not going to work, my brothers and sisters. I'm from the hood. I don't know how to deal with these bears." But anyway, the bear left us alone after we screamed a little bit, and but I woke up that night. The whole point is this: I woke up that night. I was sleeping. I was dreaming. And I looked at my brother, a dude named Doug Cunningham, a minister in the Ohio United Methodist Conference, and I said, "Do you believe in social analysis?" Then I went back to sleep. I can see that now. It was like my subconscious. This bear had evoked, from a Native American perspective, my awareness of God. Because
Mm,
as a Native Americans in that part of the territory talked about, the bear is God because he can't eat you.
mm,
But for some reason, even in my deep subconscious, I knew I had to do something in social and cultural analysis. And so I decided to do the PhD at the University of Chicago because that was a place where I could get a top education in religion as well as one in the social sciences. And so there I studied, really trying to understand social change. And from that, I did my doctorate and I examined the relationship between West African religion and African American religion. And that was kind of like the beginning of my academic career. Although I had written some papers dealing with the freedom struggle, I'm at Cornell West there when we were both graduate students. He was at Yale and I was at Chicago, and I've always been interested in social analysis, and so his Marxist perspective was interesting, so I was into that. But the book that was published by Oxford Press is still in press,
mm.
Honoring the Ancestors, an African culture interpretation of Black religion and literature, is where I laid out my basic understanding and methodology because I wanted people to understand the contributions of African religion and African American Christianity to world culture. And so I started. I've done some other things in between, but my latest book is Blackcentricity, where now I'm not just looking at West Africa, but I'm tracing the origins of the Western religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam from its foundations as it was first put down by Black ancient cultures of Egypt, Nubia, and Sumeria, because that information has been suppressed. In America, you can't, the idea is that Black folks are inferior, right? But if Black folks were actually the ones who laid down your basic theology and philosophy, how can you call us inferior? But in the 1600s, due to modern slavery, all of that information was erased, decimated, disguised, hidden. And so I've been trying to recover that. And this book is one of my formal attempts to challenge the way in which American Christianity has not only culturally appropriated the thought of ancient Black peoples, but then at the same time refuses to give them credit for both the good and the bad of what that means. So that's kind of a brief synopsis of my background, my story.
Yeah, well, thank you. I want to get a little bit more into the book itself. Can I ask you, would you say that it's accurate to describe yourself as a Black liberation theologian?
If liberation theology wasn't so white, I could.
That's why
I was talking with my Quaker. I was talking with my Quaker friends tonight. We were looking at some Native American religious specialists, let's say, and they were talking about how theology is so foreign, right, to the Native American experience. And I would say the same thing about Black theology to a certain extent. I mean, I knew Dr. Cone, James Cone, the founder of Black Liberation Theology, very well. We would debate each other, and we really had a friendship. And one of the things I had to tell Brother Cone is that, you're doing Black theology, and all the other Black theologians told me the same thing, but no one in the Black church understands what in the world you're talking about, right? Because all the terms and methodologies are so Eurocentric. We know you're talking about freedom, and that's what you have, so at least it translates in academia, right? But in terms of what's happening on the streets, it's about Malcolm and it's about Martin. And Cone actually eventually, his last most popular book was Malcolm and Martin in America, right? Where he got away from the traditional European categories and started talking about narrative, about story. My dissertation was actually called the narrative theology, the African American spiritual, because it is the narrative, it is the story of the experience with God that leads people to a deeper understanding of God, not theology per se, but the experience of the divine. And so yes, I do Black liberation theology. I've taught it, but at heart, I found myself to be a follower of the Spirit. And wherever that might lead me, I'm open to the movement of the Spirit, especially as it has been expressed by Black people in Africa, in Asia, and in America.
So tell us a little bit more about what you mean when you talk about this narrative methodology.
Okay. One of the things we like to say is that depending on the method you use, you tend to leave off where you started. You tend to go where you started, right? So if I'm going to use traditional, say, Greek philosophical categories and talk about God in those terms, looking at the debate, for instance, between was God was Jesus a human or was he divine? Okay, so what? Was Jesus concerned about that? Did he come to answer those metaphysical questions about whether God was, he was human? No, he did not. Yeah, that was the Greek imposition of their own philosophical system on what their experience of the Messiah was, right? It had nothing to do with Jesus's intention, but you have these cultural categories that the European churches began to impose upon what Christianity was. And so if you start there, you won't get much further than that, right? And so the methodologies that do not that are not based on Greek philosophical ideas, like a Native American spirituality, like Black spirituality, like most indigenous spiritualities, which really talk about the narrative, the story, the experience of the divine, and not trying to categorize it. Even Buddhism, right? I've studied Buddhism quite a bit, taught at a Buddhist university. And one of the things that the Buddha says is there's some things you can't answer. Some things you should even question, because you're not going to get an answer. It's going to be satisfactory. So why do you waste your time in this metaphysical, trying to get the real truth? You know, it's a waste of time. What we really have to be about is love and compassion to each other. That's why Jesus came, right? That's why the Buddha came, right? That's why Brother Muhammad came, right? The prophet, right? That's why Gandhi was here. That's why King was here, trying to teach us how to love one another, not trying to figure out the nature of the divine.
And how do you see the relationship between spiritual experience and political commitment? You alluded to that a little bit in your own story.
Right. When I did my interpretation of African American and African religion, I talked about the 4 F's, which one of my students has turned into a philosophy of spiritual wholeness: faith, family, freedom, and I always forget the 4th F: faith, family, freedom. Anyway, I don't know why I do. I can only name 3. I always name them in strange ways. But the idea is freedom, right? Freedom. Freedom is fundamentally what the divine is about, right? Calling us to freedom. And so when I talk about politics, I'm talking about freedom. For me, that's a spiritual category as well, right? There's no attempt in the West to divide politics from religion, right? They live within and among each other. And so when I experience the freedom of the spirit, I also experience the freedom of the body, right? Martin Luther said that what did he tell the German peasants when they wanted freedom? He said, well, no, your spirit can be free, but not your body. You might belong to God, but your ass belongs to the nobles, right? Same thing he told indigenous people. Now we can give you Jesus, we can give you spiritual freedom, but physical freedom, now those are 2 different things. But as I understand, as my people, and most people understand who are not engaged in oppressive activities, that spiritual freedom includes civil rights, human rights, the freedom to be who you can be, the freedom to have a family, the freedom to eat, the freedom for medical care, all these things which ensure your personal safety. And so for me, freedom is both a religious category, it's also a political category, and they should not live in opposition to each other.
Yeah. So reflecting a little bit upon the current conjuncture, I mean, we have this ongoing climate catastrophe. We have a situation of pretty much never-ending war. Some might say it's a kind of apocalyptic scenario we face. Can you give us some reflections with respect to like what this kind of spiritual political methodology of yours, what kind of instruments it gives us for dealing with this current conjuncture?
Yeah, unfortunately, Christianity has been one of the real progenitors, instruments in the oppression of creation. Right, we know that. European Christianity, in which Genesis is interpreted as God giving man dominion and control over the earth, has been misused, right? And so I tend to hang out with, or side myself more with, there's a group called Christian animists, Christian animists, who understand Jesus as a shaman himself. Jesus is someone who's interested in creation. Jesus, with his emphasis on God being concerned with the sparrow, right? Jesus is one who had a dove light upon him. There's a continuity with humans' nature in the world. Paul says the whole world groans, right? Looking for liberation, looking for freedom, And I don't agree much with Paul on anything, but he didn't understand the way in which creation itself, right, is longing for freedom. Because, the creation itself is contradictory. I'm sorry, the creation itself is contradictory in some ways in which we have storms and tornadoes and thunder. There's destruction even within creation. So even creation groans for freedom, for harmony, And so, but that's something that's part of our problem with Western civilization, right? This need to conquer, to tear up Mother Earth, no respect for the earth, right? Something you find, and you don't find that in Native American and other indigenous cultures. There's a real respect for nature that you just don't have because Christianity centered its understandings on this theological category of human beings having dominion, power over the earth, and not being sustained from it, because there's this big separation, right, between creation and the rest and humanity, and that's something that many people have. I mean, I think one reason why Alice Walker's work was so important, especially what was her main book, The Color Purple, right? When Seeley's talking with God, she's obviously in tune with the natural world, with the spiritual world. You talked about the apocalyptic writings, someone like Octavia Butler, right? Who's probably the greatest apocalyptic writer we had in the past 40, 50 years. So she talks about how Christianity distorted, right, and attempted to control the creature, the land, the people, instead of learning how to live with it, right? The apocalypse comes from human beings' self-destructive tendencies, right? It's not something that God ordains, right? It's something that comes out of our own willingness to destroy our home, right? And so we wouldn't have to worry about apocalypticism if we actually loved our home, the earth, right? The air, the water. When I was first starting out, I would look at water tables around the United States. There's this map, and they had a red dot wherever there was a problem with the water source, right? So you can't drink that water. It was sparsely populated, 40 years ago. Now it's like everything is red, right? Because we have just poisoned all of our water sources, right? Flint is just the tip of the iceberg, right? But the way in which we have really desecrated our home, and it's coming back on us now. So once again, the apocalypse is human creation, and it can be reversed, hopefully, right? We hope, if we really began to care about the world in which we live. That's spiritual, that's political, right? Got to activate people to really vote right, support right candidates, and have a philosophy of a spirituality or philosophy that really cherishes Mother Earth.
Right on. And some people think of Christianity as fundamentally a pacifist religion. And this is something that makes revolutionaries quite skeptical of Christianity. Could you say something about that?
Yeah, there's two sides of it. The United States is a Christian nation, right? we're real pacifists. In the United States, we have proved that, right? But obviously, people mean the early. I've had an ongoing debate with Christian pacifists, right? Because I think they misinterpreted some of the Christian scriptures so that they highlight what they think is the pacifism of Jesus, and I'll read those scriptures entirely different, and that's one reason because that Christianity has been available to conduct violence, right? Because of the early writers, like now here we go with Apostle Paul, right? Who says it's okay for the state to be violent against those who are criminals who are violating the laws of the land, right? So Christianity, from its very inception, even though in the beginning Christians would not join armies, would not join the Roman army, etc., very quickly, within 50 years, right? Christians had no problem with being a part of the Roman Empire, right? Their theologians wanted to accommodate the Roman Empire, right? Because they did not want to be squashed right? And so by the time you get to Augustine in the 4th century, Augustine is writing about how you can be violent in certain ways, being proportional, having justifiable means to be violent. So it's not like violence is bad. So what I'm saying is most people don't know the history of Christianity. If you knew the history of Christianity, then you would not think that this is a pacifist religion. Now there are certain peace churches that I respect, like the Amish, like the Quakers, like the Mennonites, who have a peace tradition. And I respect them because at least they're very principled, and more importantly, they're willing to suffer, right? And so a great theologian by the name of H.R. Niebuhr refused to participate in World War II, right? I think he was jailed for a while, or at least under indictment, because he said, my religion does not call for me to do violence against anybody, right? Many quote conscientious objectors have been willing to suffer for their beliefs of Christian pacifism, but they are in a distinct minority. So believe me, you don't have to worry about Christians being it's really kind of, the odd thing, of course, is that you have this thing in the Black community because of Martin Luther King Jr., right? The nonviolence, the Christian pacifists, right? But at the same time, we understand that without the wars that Blacks have been involved in, we would not have socially progression the way we have, right? The way to prove that we were Americans was by participating in the Civil War, right? We wouldn't have been free without that very violent activity, right? Every generation has been challenged to be violent. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. Prove to us, right, that you can be violent in defense of Western or American ideas. And believe me, my Christian pastor in the 1960s, he was on the draft board. But he had no problem with telling us it's time to join up. And we had a lot of problems with it, right? But so this idea is that Christianity is inherently pacifist. I don't think so. I wrote a paper that I presented to the American Academy of Religion on divine violence.
Yeah.
Right. And how throughout the scripture you have God acting violently for the cause of justice. Right. I talked about demonic violence that oppresses people, but divine violence frees people. Right. The reason why you had the great flood in Genesis, which is actually the story that the Hebrew writers got from the Black Sumerians, right? The Great Flood. The reason why God punished the people is because they were violent toward each other. What can I do to these violent people? Let's just get rid of them, right? I'll put a flood on you. That's the ultimate punishment, right? And that's a consistent thing. Even when we talk about, it's something Malcolm talked about. He said, y'all talking about a pacifist Jesus. When I read the book of Revelation, Jesus is kicking butt. Right? Jesus is very violent against those who oppress other people. So I don't get it, So yeah, there's a tradition of divine violence that runs throughout Christianity that I highlighted in that paper I wrote.
Right on. So you mentioned how the story of the flood is a story that is taken from the Black Sumerians. So I think that's a good entry into talking a little bit more about your book, Blackcentricity. So could you elaborate a little bit more upon the relationship between Christianity and the Black Sumerian culture in particular?
Yeah, this is almost like a detective story. about 3 or 4 years ago, I saw this book called The Sumerian Problem. I said, I know the Sumerians had a problem, so I'm reading this book, and they're trying to determine the ethnicity of the ancient Sumerians. Now, why is that important? Because white scholars have been trying to figure out, well, who should we give credit to who began civilization, right? We're this origin fantasy in the West, right? If you're first, you must be the best, right? And so they've been saying that they couldn't have been the Black Egyptians. They tried to say it was Egypt, but until people started digging up all these monuments with Black folks on, Black pharaohs and priests and the whole bit, I said, oh God, that ain't gonna work. So let's say it was the Sumerians who were first, right? And so you have all these textbooks saying, well, the Egyptians were some great people, but the Sumerians, they were the first. That's where all our knowledge came from. And in fact, Egyptians probably borrowed it from the Sumerians, right? But in 1872, uh, Sir Henry Rawlinson, who was later knighted by the Queen, I think Queen Victoria, discovered a way to translate cuneiform. And he found two things. There really was a people called the Sumerians. Before then, people had talked about the Sumer and Akkad, AKKAD, the Akkadians, right? Rawlinson found out, no, the Sumerians were actually first, and Akkadian culture grew up out of Sumer. So then you get Assyria, you get Babylon, etc. But the Sumerians were the original folks who who originated culture. People say, that's cool, I can deal with that. But then they began to read the cuneiform. They found that the Sumerians called themselves a black-faced people. It's like, oh my God, they call themselves black people. We really got a problem now, right? Because we said that these black Egyptians couldn't have done it, and all the people we said were done it, well, they're black too. What are we gonna do? What are we gonna say, right? So then they developed what they call the Sumerian problem. We don't know what their ethnicity is, right? So, I mean, you're an academic, you know how that works, right? They did a little trickeration, right?
Trickeration.
Trickeration. In a video I put out, I talked about how this scholar began to translate black-haired and black-faced people as dark-haired and dark-faced people, right? And there's another scholar, the top guy in Sumerian, said, no, come on, y'all. Y'all know that thing. That word is black. You can go to any Sumerian dictionary, encyclopedia, and no, the word is black-faced, black-headed people. So let's stop playing, right? But scholars made it a problem. We still can't figure it out. They say they're black, but we just don't get it, And so if you look at most textbooks now, they'll talk about Mesopotamians, but they won't talk about Sumerians, right? Because they really don't want to be challenged at that level, And so I began, this is interesting. And as I began to do some more research, I found all these once again images of black folk who were Sumerians from that time, right? Now, why is that important? Because the Bible, Judaism says it was basically developed out of two sources. Abraham, who came from Sumer, of Sumer, right? And Moses, who came from Egypt, an African cat, black dude. So the two major sources, right, for Judaism, and then of course Christianity and Islam, came from these two black cultures, right? And so for me, that was like a revelation, right? I began to put two and two together, and to realize that we've been hoodwinked, right? We've been told this is a white man's religion, right? That black folk had nothing to do. I mean, most of the work by black theologians, they talked about the African presence in the Bible. Not that Africans actually wrote something, not that black folks actually contributed in terms of its writing and culture, but the presence, African presence in the Bible, black presence in the Bible. When in fact, it wasn't just present, they were the originators of most of the sacred stories that then were adopted by Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The flood story, the first story against sexual violence was the rape of Inanna developed by the Sumerians, where the goddess is raped by a man and he's punished, he's killed because of a sexual violation. Ideas of circumcision, of baptism, a dying, rising savior from the Egyptians. Almost every fundamental theological concept was first conceived by these Egyptian or Sumerian people. And then the Jews, Christians, and Muslims developed those particular ideas according to their own cultural understandings. But when you look at the foundation, the historical foundation, that's where it began. Unfortunately, black folks have been saying that for a long time, but they weren't trained scholars, right? So people didn't take them seriously. Right? And you sure as heck could not study it at the University of Chicago Divinity School. I'm wearing my University of Chicago hat, by the way. Yeah, they were gonna let you study that, But yet, all the great documents are in the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago. But as a doctoral student, you were never allowed to go over there and see this stuff, right? Because we got to look at the German stuff, the Greek, the Greek stuff. We can't look at Sumer and Egypt, and that's Middle Eastern, right? We got this separation of knowledge, sociology of knowledge. So you have generations of scholars and ministers and clergy who, for them, this is new information, right? And so my book is a first attempt, to really bring this to the fore, because before, my first book's African. Christianity is an African religion, because most of those early doctrines in Egypt were definitely imbibed into Christianity, and the Madonna, the Christ figure, resurrection, eternal life, etc. But when you put that with the Sumerians, which were very influential in the development of Old Testament scripture, now you got the double whammy, right? The ziggurat, Tower of Babel, all those kind of ideas came out of, you read Genesis 1-8. Most of those stories are from ancient Sumerian culture, right? They then get elaborated by Judaism, right? So my book, Blackcentricity, looks at the ways in which scholars attempted to hide the Sumerian and Black Egyptian fundamental historical foundation of these great world religions. So.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's fascinating. So, some of the people who will be listening are familiar with and linked to in some way or another the Kurdish struggle, which is something you have some familiarity with, having co-authored with me a review of Öcalan's Manifesto for Democratic Civilization. Could you maybe make an effort to put this work in some kind of dialogue with Öcalan's project in his Manifesto for Democratic Civilization?
I think it really has a lot to do with the level of democracy. Where's democracy come from? Who is it about, really? Right? When you look at the stories, and I was talking this about my Quaker friends, democracy comes from the people, right? The basic fundamental understanding of God in traditional or indigenous societies come from the people. It's not imposed from above, right? I think one of the points that Kurdish scholars have made is that you cannot have democracy imposed by somebody, because that's fascist, right? You have to respect the rights of indigenous peoples, right? Native peoples. They know what they want. They know what they need. They have knowledge, right? They don't need anyone telling them how to live, who to be, how to be. There tends to be a fundamental disrespect by the powers that be on people who do not, who are of a quote lower socioeconomic status, right? But what the scriptures have always talked about is that God favors the poor, God favors the lowly, God favors the shepherd, God favors those who are without pretense, God favors the humble, right? God favors those who are not searching to be emperors, to have power. That's whom God favors. And for me, that's the basic foundation of what democracy is about. And so I see Öcalan's struggle. For me, that's what it's about. It's about empowering the people and not letting a the imposition of larger or more, quote, powerful political structures oppress the everyday working class person or peasant, as whatever term you want to use. I don't want to get too Marxist in terms of the proletariat, but the spirit exists in community.
Yeah.
Right? And we can really buttress that community and let the community speak. We're on the side of freedom.
Yeah. And so yes, I think that speaks, that's a a very powerful way of putting your message in dialogue with the Kurdish freedom struggle. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the situation in the United States right now, the political situation in the United States right now, and the moment of Black Lives Matter in particular, and how you some reflections with respect to the plight of the African American community at this conjuncture in the United States.
Well, like I like to say, we're back to a normal racism. We had super racism for a while, and now we're back to normal racism. See, one of the real problems I had with the Black Lives Matter movement is because it was constantly being bought out by the Democratic power structure. It was just crazy. I mean, they were really taking marching orders from the liberal Democrats, right? And so, even though I respect the enthusiasm, the strategy was just not there. They were not able to make their own decisions because many of them, they owe other masters, and so that has been a continuing problem. You don't hear about Black Lives Matters, right? As a continuing organizational force in the Black community, right? They're not like the Panthers, right? The Panthers weren't invited to the Democratic National Convention. It's not going to happen. The Panthers were not invited to be a part of the system that oppresses us, right? Black Lives Matter for me has been a little bit too cozy with the system, right? And so we're always looking for one of the beautiful things about what happened down in Georgia with Stacey Adams. That wasn't a Black Lives Matter movement, right? That was Black women, mainly Black church women, saying we got to help our community. So we're gonna get out here in the streets, right? We're gonna sign up people to vote. True democratic movement is what my sister Ella Jenkins did with the SCLC and SNCC. Empowerment comes from the people, right? Doesn't come, and you have to work at a grassroots level in order for freedom to really be free, right? And so you saw those women out there, right? And who did what they needed to do in order to make things happen in the Black community. It was a beautiful thing, right? So I see that as kind of a contrast. They weren't trying to just they weren't trying to get on TV and get money from George Soros. I mean, it was about empowering people to change their situation. Even the idea of defunding the police, which came out of the BLM, that stopped people from getting elected because it was too threatening to the white populace, right? And it didn't make any sense, quite frankly. I mean, we're in a capitalist society. We need police, because we get the hell oppressed out of us. Police. I mean, I hate to say it, but capitalism needs police. And what I'm saying is on two levels. All kidding aside, capitalism needs a strong police force to exist, right? And for anybody to think that you're going to stop having police because you asked to defund the police, that's not the smartest idea you could have, right? On the other hand, what we do need to talk about particular issues. That's what I love about what's happening in Georgia, right? Instead of talking about, quote, defunding the police and let people draw you into that category or that phrase that would limit your possibilities, you need to talk about re-education. Let's re-educate the police, right? Let's redistribute the funds. Let's hire more mental health workers, right? Let's deal with mass incarceration. But to allow ourselves to be reduced to defund the police, it really cost the Democrats, houses, members in the House of Representatives, as well as the senator. I think he was running against Lindsey Graham. They said that was the main problem. Whites heard defund the police. They said, "Oh no, we can't support this Black man." So you have to be politically astute, in the way you operate, and just get a grassroots, a community basis. What's the way that really was able to change things and get rid of Trump. A few months ago, I said the only way that Trump was going to lose was through an act of God. And if COVID wasn't an act of God, I don't know what I don't know what was. You know what I'm saying? And, people may not like me saying that, but the bottom line, it was so horrible. And, even then, he almost won. He could have won, right? If they hadn't have, I'm getting ready to go off on the tangent, but if they had announced the vaccine a week earlier, Trump would have, I don't think it's a mistake that they did not announce the vaccine until 1 week after the election was over. Like they didn't know, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think of it in relationship to, like, had there not been a pandemic, what would have been the likely outcome of that election? I think the pandemic is overdetermining, and you're right. Even in the context of the pandemic, had the vaccine come out a little bit earlier, who knows what would have happened? It was a close election.
No
It was a close
Oh,
election.
no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Electoral
So
college or something else.
yeah, yeah. So let me just push you a little bit more on this question. So to move away maybe from the current conjuncture, one of the things that was really powerful in Malcolm X's vision and the Panthers' vision as well was a vision that really articulated the relationship between the plight of the African American people and the plight of suffering people around the world. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, something, that's one thing one reason why I like the way you've been able to tie different struggles from around the world to show that this is a common struggle, right? The problem, of course, is that we know that for African American people, it has been a kiss of death, right? Black leaders who look overseas and see how America is also oppressing other folks, it's been very dangerous for them to do that. When we talk about Malcolm's Pan-Africanism and his support of third world liberation movements, or whether we talk about Martin's decision to oppose the Vietnam War, right, and align himself with poor working class people. So it's a very dangerous thing. So I don't want to make light of that, right? So that's once again why it has to be strategic, and that's one reason why you don't see, many Black activist groups aligning themselves with other liberation movements, because we all know that's a dangerous thing. Even this idea of what happened with the insurrection. I'm convinced that the FBI was leading that demonstration on January 6th. That's what they do. They foment violent action, which results in the destruction of the goals of the people. I mean, that's what they do. And so it really kind of, I think academia is one of the few places in academics that can really make those connections, right? But we can make those connections because we ain't on the streets.
Yeah.
Right? And we can raise it at the level of political discourse and then challenge people in the House of Representatives and the Senate to take a look at how those relationships exist, right? But for a Black group to do that, to make those kind of moves, has been particularly destructive to them because of the sensitivity. I mean, we're an empire. The United States is an empire. People forget that this is an empire, and you don't mess with people's empire, right? Because we still have a democracy, there are ways in which we can push and help people in their struggle, right, for freedom, right? As long as we understand the possible price it might cost us as well as them, right? So I think it's important to be strategic. I went to the University of Chicago. The foreign students used to laugh at us and say, "You guys don't get it, do you? You don't know how much you're under surveillance. Anything you do, is being watched by people. And they were right. They were right. Malcolm understood that his death was caused by CIA, right? King, the FBI, FBI documents clearly show that King was being followed and James Earl Ray was being followed. Before James Earl Ray killed him, they did not prevent his death. All right. So and now I don't even talk about the CIA and other other parts around the world and how they like to get into these movements in order to subvert them or just do it themselves, right? So we're on dangerous ground, you know.
Yeah.
But the best way I think to deal with it is at the level of political discourse and in very organized ways with other groups who are fighting for their freedom wherever they might be.
Right on. Very wise words. Very wise words. Profound. So, any last words for us? Really, really wide-reaching discussion. Thank you very much for that.
No, I believe in the great conversation. You know, I really do believe in the movement of the spirit. Whenever I've been involved in, yeah, I'm talking about being careful, right? I haven't been a careful day in my life. That's, so I'm kind of being, because that's my calling. Spirit tell you to do something, you got to do it. But what I found, any times I've been in any kind of freedom struggle, whether it's trying to close down University of Chicago for a while to get rid of to have the board of trustees change some things, whether it's at Northwestern University, whether it's other places I've worked out the streets, the spirit's always there, and that's what's comforting. That in the midst of a political struggle, you will find the presence of God. That's a beautiful thing to me, right? That's a beautiful thing to me, and that's what Black folks understand. That there is no when you're struggling for freedom, God is there with you, and so the opposing idea of give me freedom or give me Jesus. I mean, come on, once you're struggling for freedom, Jesus is there. The Spirit is there to help you in your struggle. Be whether you how you determine who your God is and who your higher power is, that they're there. And so I really encourage my brothers and sisters around the world to keep on struggling, right? The Spirit will meet you and comfort you, even when you think you've lost, you've won, because you're in the presence of the divine. So.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for those inspiring words, Don. And we will continue our conversation for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.